At my nephew's graduation dinner, my family was mocking my pathetic financial situation when Judge Harrison from the next table approached us. "Excuse me, are you Amanda Foster? I'm presiding over your DUI case tomorrow." My sister nodded nervously as he continued, "I have to ask, are you related to attorney Victoria Foster? Because she's argued some of the most impressive cases in my courtroom." The table fell silent as my family realized their poor daughter was the same Victoria Foster whose legal victories had been making headlines across the state. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When I graduated from Georgetown Law School 8 years ago, my family attended the ceremony like they were fulfilling a tedious obligation. My mother, Catherine Foster, spent the entire event checking her phone and making disapproving comments about the liberal nonsense they were teaching in law schools these days. My father, Robert Foster, kept muttering about how much money I'd wasted on fancy education when I could have gotten a practical job right out of college. And my sister Amanda, who'd inherited the family's successful real estate business, spent the ceremony whispering to her husband about how Victoria always has to be different. They saw my law degree as an expensive mistake, my decision to focus on civil rights law as naive idealism, my choice to work for a small firm rather than join a corporate giant, as proof that I couldn't handle real legal work. For 7 years, they never asked about my cases. Not when I won landmark discrimination settlements. Not when I argued appeals that set statewide precedents. Not when I spent months preparing cases that protected workers' rights and civil liberties. To them, I was just Victoria, the daughter who chose social justice over financial security, principles over profit, helping people over helping herself. The invitation to my nephew Tyler's high school graduation dinner came with a passive-aggressive note from Amanda. "Victoria, we're having dinner at Chez Laurent to celebrate Tyler's achievement. It's an expensive restaurant, so don't feel obligated to come if it's outside your budget." I almost didn't go. My caseload was overwhelming. I was preparing for a major employment discrimination trial that would affect hundreds of workers, and I had briefs due for 2 different appeals. But Tyler had always been kind to me, and I wanted to celebrate his acceptance to college. Chez Laurent was exactly the kind of place my family loved. Overpriced, pretentious, and designed to make people feel important. When I arrived in my simple black dress and practical shoes, the contrast with my family's designer outfits was immediately apparent. "Victoria!" my mother announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "We weren't sure you'd make it. This place is quite expensive." "I'm fine, Mom. Congratulations, Tyler." Tyler smiled genuinely. "Thanks, Aunt Victoria. I'm really glad you came." But as we sat down, the familiar pattern began. My father made jokes about my charity work, masquerading as a legal career. Amanda regaled the table with stories about her latest real estate deals, emphasizing the dollar amounts involved. My mother compared my simple outfit to Amanda's designer dress, suggesting I might want to invest in some professional attire. "Victoria," my father said as we ordered appetizers, "when are you going to get serious about your career? You're 32 years old, and you're still working at that little firm doing pro bono cases." "Dad, I do important work. I help people who can't afford legal representation." "That's very noble," Amanda said with barely concealed condescension. "But nobility doesn't pay the bills. Look at you. You're driving a 10-year-old car, living in a tiny apartment, wearing clothes from discount stores. Don't you want more for yourself?" The conversation continued in this vein throughout dinner. My family treated my career like a hobby I'd eventually outgrow, my financial situation like a character flaw I needed to overcome. They measured success exclusively in terms of bank accounts and material possessions, completely blind to the impact of the work I was doing. Tyler tried to redirect the conversation several times, asking about my recent cases, but my parents and Amanda consistently steered it back to my perceived failures and limitations. That's when my sister mentioned her upcoming court date for a DUI charge, and everything changed. "It's just a minor traffic violation," she said dismissively. "The judge will probably just give me a fine." She had no idea that the judge she'd be facing the next morning knew my work better than my own family did. The conversation about Amanda's I quickly became another opportunity for my family to demonstrate their misunderstanding of how the legal system actually worked. They treated her impending court appearance like a minor inconvenience that could be resolved with the right connections and attitude. Honestly, Amanda, my mother said, cutting her salmon with precise movements, I don't understand why you're even worried. It's not like you hurt anyone. You were barely over the limit. My father nodded agreement while signaling the waiter for another bottle of wine. Your mother's right. These DUI laws have gotten completely out of hand. When I was your age, they'd just tell you to drive home carefully. The worst part, Amanda continued, is that I have to miss work tomorrow morning for this nonsense. Do you know how much money I could make in the time I'll be wasting in that courthouse? I listened to this conversation with growing discomfort, knowing that Amanda's casual dismissal of drunk driving laws revealed a dangerous attitude that could get her into serious trouble with the judge. Amanda, I said carefully, you should take this seriously. DUI charges can have significant consequences, especially if you seem dismissive in court. Victoria, please, my mother interrupted with that familiar tone of exasperation. Amanda doesn't need legal advice from someone who spends her time defending criminals and troublemakers. I don't defend criminals, Mom. I represent people whose rights have been violated. Same difference, my father said with a dismissive wave. The point is, Amanda's situation is completely different. This is a respectable family with a clean record, not some charity case you picked up off the street. Amanda's husband, Derek, joined the conversation with his own brand of entitled ignorance. Besides, Amanda's lawyer says this will probably just be a fine and maybe some community service. Nothing serious. Who's your lawyer? I asked. Bradley Morrison from Morrison & Associates. He specializes in getting these charges reduced or dismissed. Very expensive, but worth it. I knew Morrison's reputation. He was exactly the kind of lawyer who promised easy solutions to wealthy clients, while charging enormous fees for minimal work. He was also known for encouraging clients to show disrespect for the legal process, believing that arrogance and money were interchangeable with competence. Amanda, what did Morrison tell you to expect in court? He said to dress nicely, show up on time, and let him handle everything. He's confident the judge will see that this was just a minor mistake by someone who's normally very responsible. The strategy was completely wrong for Judge Harrison's courtroom. Harrison was known for his intolerance of entitled defendants who treated DUI charges like parking tickets. He'd sentenced wealthy executives to jail time for showing exactly the kind of dismissive attitude my family was displaying tonight. You might want to prepare for the possibility that the judge won't be as lenient as Morrison suggested, I warned. Victoria, honestly, my mother said, her voice sharp with irritation. You work with petty criminals and civil rights cases. Amanda's situation involves respectable people dealing with a simple traffic matter. There's no comparison. A DUI isn't a traffic matter, Mom. It's a criminal charge. Oh, please, Amanda laughed. You make it sound like I robbed a bank. It's a minor violation that happens to thousands of people every year. Derek pulled out his phone to show pictures from their recent vacation to Europe. Speaking of money, did we mention that Amanda just closed the Riverside development deal? $12 million in sales commissions this year alone. The pivot was deliberate and cruel. While Amanda celebrated her financial success, I was supposed to sit quietly and accept my family's assessment that my career was worthless because it didn't generate comparable income. That's wonderful, Amanda, I said genuinely. I'm glad business is going well. It must be nice, my mother said pointedly, to have a career that actually provides financial security. Tomorrow morning, Amanda would discover that financial security meant nothing in Judge Harrison's courtroom. But tonight, my family was convinced that money could solve any problem and that success was measured solely in dollars. As we waited for dessert, the conversation took an even more uncomfortable turn when my family began openly critiquing my life choices with the kind of brutal honesty that only comes after several bottles of expensive wine. Victoria, my father said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd had too much to drink. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Okay, Dad. Are you happy living like this? I mean, really happy? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've thrown away 8 years of your life chasing some impossible dream of changing the world. The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Around us, other diners continued their conversations. But our table had fallen into the kind of tense silence that made nearby servers slow their steps to avoid interrupting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm very happy with my work, Dad. I help people who have nowhere else to turn. But at what cost? My mother interjected. Victoria, you're 32 years old. You have no savings, no property, no prospects for advancement. When are you going to start thinking practically about your future? Amanda set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. Mom's right, Victoria. I love that you want to help people, but you can't save the world by staying poor forever. Look around this restaurant. Everyone here has figured out how to be successful. Why can't you? Derek nodded enthusiastically. Amanda's absolutely right. Take Bradley Morrison, for example. He started out doing public defender work just like you. But he was smart enough to transition into corporate law where the real money is. Now he drives a BMW and owns a house in the hills. I thought about Morrison's reputation among judges and fellow attorneys. He was known for cutting corners, misleading clients, and treating the legal system like a game where rules were suggestions rather than requirements. His wealth came from exploiting desperate clients and overcharging for mediocre representation. Derek, Morrison and I have very different approaches to practicing law. Exactly, my father said, as if I'd just proven his point. His approach makes money. Yours doesn't. That's not a philosophical difference. It's a practical failure. Tyler, who'd been quietly eating his dessert throughout this family intervention, finally spoke up. Aunt Victoria, didn't you win some big case last month? I saw something about it on the news. The table fell silent. None of them had seen any news coverage of my work, because they didn't pay attention to civil rights cases or employment law victories. What case? My mother asked, with barely concealed skepticism. The Henderson versus Riverside manufacturing case. We won a $12 million settlement for workers who were systematically denied overtime pay. Amanda laughed sharply. $12 million? Victoria, if that were true, your cut of that settlement would have solved all your financial problems. It doesn't work like that, Amanda. The money goes to the workers who were cheated out of their wages. But surely you got something? Derek pressed. Some percentage? Some fee structure? We got our legal fees covered and the satisfaction of knowing that 800 workers received the money they were owed. My family exchanged glances that clearly communicated their assessment. I was either lying about the case's importance or too naive to structure proper compensation for myself. Victoria, my mother said with the patience of someone explaining basic math to a child, that's exactly what we're talking about. You're letting other people profit from your work while you stay poor. They had no idea that the Henderson case had made headlines across 3 states, that Judge Harrison had praised my legal strategy from the bench, or that other attorneys were studying my approach to similar cases. To them, any work that didn't directly enrich me was evidence of professional failure. The restaurant was beginning to empty as the evening wound down, but my family showed no signs of ending their impromptu intervention about my life choices. If anything, the alcohol had made them more determined to solve what they saw as the problem of my existence. Victoria, Amanda said, pulling out her phone, I'm going to help you whether you want it or not. I know several corporate lawyers who could get you interviews at real firms, places where you could make actual money. Amanda, I don't want to work at a corporate firm. See, that's your problem right there, my father interjected. You think wanting something different makes you noble, but it just makes you impractical. You're 32 years old and you're living like a college student. My mother leaned forward with the expression she wore when delivering what she considered important wisdom. Victoria, sweetheart, there's a difference between having principles and being foolish. You can still help people while making enough money to live properly. How? I asked. By charging desperate people fees they can't afford? By representing corporations against workers? By defending companies that violate environmental laws? By being strategic, Derek said confidently. Look at Bradley Morrison. He takes high-paying corporate cases that fund his pro bono work. Best of both worlds. I knew the truth about Morrison's pro bono work. It consisted mainly of showing up to charity events where wealthy clients could see him looking philanthropic. His actual legal practice focused on helping corporations avoid accountability for harmful practices. That's not how Morrison's practice actually works, I said carefully. How would you know? Amanda asked. You've never worked at his level. Tyler, who'd been listening to this conversation with growing discomfort, tried to change the subject. Should we get the check? It's getting pretty late. But my family wasn't finished with their mission to rescue me from my chosen career path. Victoria, my mother said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when I was a teenager making poor decisions. We're trying to help you here. Can't you see that your current path is leading nowhere? Where exactly do you think it's leading, Mom? To poverty, isolation, and regret. You'll wake up at 45, alone and broke, wondering why you wasted your best years tilting at windmills. The assessment was so cruel and dismissive that it took my breath away. My mother had reduced my entire career to a cautionary tale, my life's work to a series of poor decisions that would inevitably lead to misery. And the people I've helped? I asked quietly. The workers who got their stolen wages back? The families who were discriminated against? Do they not matter? Of course they matter, my father said with exaggerated patience. But Victoria, you can't save everyone. At some point you have to think about yourself. Amanda nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Look at me. I make enough money from real estate to donate to charities that help people professionally. I contribute to society and take care of myself. That's called being an adult. The conversation was interrupted when I noticed a familiar figure at a nearby table. Judge Harrison was finishing dinner with his wife, and he'd clearly recognized Amanda's voice from across the restaurant. He was looking in our direction with the kind of attention that suggested he was listening to our conversation. My family had no idea that the judge who would be deciding Amanda's case tomorrow morning was sitting 15 feet away, hearing every word of their dismissive comments about the legal system and their casual attitude toward DUI charges. But more importantly, Judge Harrison was about to discover that the family berating me for my unsuccessful legal career had no idea they were talking to one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. Judge Harrison stood up from his table and began walking toward us, his expression serious but not unkind. My family was so absorbed in their intervention about my career that they didn't notice the distinguished older man approaching until he was standing directly beside our table. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I couldn't help but overhear part of your conversation. Are you Amanda Foster?" Amanda looked up, surprised to be addressed by a stranger. "Yes, I am. Do we know each other?" "I'm Judge Harrison. I'll be presiding over your case tomorrow morning." The color drained from Amanda's face. Derek immediately straightened in his chair, and my parents exchanged panicked glances. None of them had expected to encounter the judge outside of court, and they were clearly trying to calculate how much of their conversation he'd overheard. "Judge Harrison," Amanda stammered. We weren't expecting to meet you here." "I imagine not," he said calmly. "I have to ask, are you related to attorney Victoria Foster?" The question hung in the air like a bomb, with a visible timer. My family turned to look at me with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. They'd spent the entire evening mocking my career, and now the judge who would decide Amanda's fate was asking about my professional identity. "Victoria is my sister," Amanda said quietly. Judge Harrison smiled and extended his hand toward me. "Miss Foster, it's a pleasure to meet you outside the courtroom. I have to say, your work on the Henderson versus Riverside manufacturing case was exceptional. The legal strategy you employed was both innovative and thorough." I shook his hand, acutely aware that my family was staring at this interaction with complete bewilderment. "Thank you, Your Honor. That case was particularly important to me. As it should be. $12 million in recovered wages for 800 workers. That's the kind of legal work that makes a real difference in people's lives." My father's mouth was hanging open slightly. The same case they'd dismissed minutes earlier as evidence of my poor financial planning was being praised by a sitting judge as exceptional legal work. "Judge Harrison," my mother said carefully, "are you saying that Victoria argued a case in your courtroom?" "Several cases, actually. Ms. Foster has one of the most impressive track records in civil rights law that I've seen in 20 years on the bench. Her preparation is meticulous, Her legal arguments are compelling, and her commitment to justice is unwavering. Amanda was looking at me like she'd never seen me before. Victoria, you never told us you'd argued cases in front of judges. You never asked what I did in court, Amanda. You assumed I was handling minor legal issues for poor people. Judge Harrison chuckled. Minor legal issues? Ms. Foster recently won a landmark discrimination case that set precedent for 3 neighboring states. The appellate court specifically commended her legal reasoning in their decision. Derek was shaking his head slowly. But Victoria drives an old car and lives in a small apartment. If she's winning major cases, where's the money? Mr. Foster represents clients who've been denied justice by powerful corporations, Judge Harrison explained. Her compensation comes in the form of legal fees, not contingency percentages. She chooses principle over profit. My family sat in stunned silence as Judge Harrison continued. In fact, Ms. Foster's reputation in legal circles is quite remarkable. She's been offered positions at several major firms, but she's chosen to continue her civil rights work. Offered positions? My mother whispered. Including partnerships at 2 of the most prestigious firms in the state. But Ms. Foster apparently prefers meaningful work to financial gain. As Judge Harrison returned to his table, my family remained frozen, processing the revelation that their failed daughter was one of the most respected attorneys in the state's legal community. For the first time in 8 years, they were seeing me clearly. The silence that followed Judge Harrison's departure was deafening. My family sat frozen around the table, their faces cycling through shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. The intervention they'd staged to save me from my failed career had just been exposed as a cruel joke, based on complete ignorance. Victoria, my mother said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, why didn't you tell us about these cases? About your reputation in the legal community? I tried, Mom. Every time I mentioned my work, you changed the subject or dismissed it as unimportant. Amanda was staring at her hands, clearly processing the magnitude of what had just happened. When you mentioned the Henderson case earlier, I thought you were exaggerating. I thought you were trying to make your work sound more important than it was. You thought I was lying? I thought you were embellishing, making small cases sound bigger to justify your choices. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Victoria, if Judge Harrison is right about your reputation, if you've really been offered partnerships at major firms, then why are you living like you're struggling financially? Because I choose to live modestly, so I can afford to take cases that matter to me. Because I'd rather help workers recover stolen wages than help corporations avoid accountability. My father found his voice, though it sounded strained. Victoria, you let us think you were unsuccessful. You sat here tonight while we criticized your career, your life choices, your financial situation. Why didn't you defend yourself? Because you should have trusted me enough to ask what I actually did for work instead of assuming I was failing. Because you should have been interested in my life regardless of whether it impressed you. Tyler, who had been quiet throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Aunt Victoria, are you really as successful as Judge Harrison said? I pulled out my phone and showed him a recent article from the State Bar Journal, featuring my work on employment discrimination cases. The headline read, Attorney Victoria Foster, Champion of Workers' Rights and Legal Innovation. This was published last month, I said quietly. It profiles my work on 3 landmark cases that changed state employment law. My mother took the phone with trembling hands and read the article aloud. Attorney Victoria Foster has emerged as one of the state's most formidable civil rights lawyers, with a track record of victories that have recovered over $30 million for exploited workers and established precedents that protect vulnerable employees across multiple industries. $30 million? Amanda whispered. In recovered wages and damages for my clients over the past 3 years. Not my personal income. Money that went to people who had been cheated by their employers. My father was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Victoria, if this article is accurate, you're one of the most successful attorneys in the state. Success isn't measured only in personal wealth, Dad. It's measured in impact, in justice achieved, in lives improved. Derek was shaking his head slowly. But why live in a small apartment and drive an old car if you could afford better? Because I don't need luxury to be happy. Because every dollar I don't spend on myself is a dollar I can use to take cases for people who can't afford legal representation. Amanda suddenly grabbed my arm. Victoria, what's going to happen tomorrow in court? If Judge Harrison knows your work, if he respects you professionally, will that help my case? The question revealed everything wrong with my family's understanding of both law and ethics. They still saw my career as something that could benefit them personally, rather than recognizing the principles that guided my work. Amanda, Judge Harrison's respect for my legal work has nothing to do with your DUI case. He'll judge your case based on the evidence and the law, not on family connections. But surely, no, Amanda, that's not how justice works, and that's not how I work. For the first time, my family was beginning to understand that their poor daughter was actually richer than any of them, just not in the currency they valued. The ride home from the restaurant was painfully quiet, with my family processing the revelation that they'd spent 8 years completely misunderstanding my career and accomplishments. But as the shock wore off, their response took a predictable turn. They wanted to find a way to benefit from my professional reputation, rather than genuinely acknowledge their mistakes. 3 days later, my mother called with what she presented as an olive branch, but was actually something much more calculated. Victoria, sweetheart, your father and I have been talking, and we realize we owe you a tremendous apology. We had no idea about your achievements, your reputation, your success in the legal community. I appreciate that, Mom. We want to make it up to you. We're planning a family celebration dinner to honor your accomplishments. We want to invite some friends, some important people in the community who should know about your work. The offer sounded generous on the surface, but I recognized the underlying motivation. My family wanted to show off their connection to a successful attorney, to benefit socially from my professional achievements. Who exactly did you want to invite? Well, Judge Martinez and his wife are close family friends, and Robert Harrison from the city council. Oh, and the Williamson family. He's the district attorney, you know. Every name on her list was someone who could potentially benefit my family's business and social connections. This wasn't about celebrating my achievements, it was about leveraging them for their own advancement. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Victoria, you should be proud of what you've accomplished. And frankly, we should have been celebrating your success all along. My father got on the phone, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. Victoria, your mother's right. We made mistakes, but now we want to support you properly. Think about it. Introducing you to the right people could help your career too. My career doesn't need help from social connections, Dad. Everyone's career benefits from networking. And quite honestly, having the district attorney know about your work could open doors for you. Amanda called later that same day with her own version of making amends. Victoria, I've been thinking about what happened at dinner, and I want to help rebuild our relationship. I'm planning a party for some of my real estate clients, and I'd love for you to be there. Several of them are business owners who might need legal representation. Amanda, I'm not looking for corporate clients, but you could be. Victoria, you've proven you're an incredible lawyer. Imagine what you could accomplish if you represented clients who could actually pay significant fees. Derek joined the conversation with his own pitch. Victoria, Amanda's right. You've been working with limited resources for too long. We know some very wealthy people who get into legal trouble and need discreet, competent representation. The kind of cases that could set you up financially for life. The pattern was becoming clear. My family wasn't apologizing for their years of dismissal. They were repositioning themselves to benefit from my professional reputation. They wanted to use my legal achievements as social capital and networking opportunities. I appreciate the offers, I said carefully, but I'm happy with my current practice. Victoria, please don't let pride get in the way of practical opportunities, my mother said. We want to help you succeed. I am succeeding, Mom. Just not in the way you understand success. But you could be making so much more money, helping so many more people if you had the right connections, my father insisted. They still didn't understand that I'd chosen my path deliberately, that my definition of success had nothing to do with wealth accumulation or social status. They saw my legal achievements as wasted potential rather than purposeful choices. I'll think about it, I said, knowing I had no intention of allowing my family to exploit my professional reputation for their benefit. Over the following weeks, my family launched what could only be described as a comprehensive research campaign. to understand my actual career achievements. They approached it with the same systematic intensity they brought to business deals and legal strategies, determined to comprehend the professional success they'd overlooked for 8 years. My mother started by contacting Georgetown Law School to verify my academic record and honors. She spent an hour on the phone with the alumni office, learning that I'd graduated magna cum laude, served on the law review, and received the Public Interest Law Award. "Victoria," she said when she called that evening, "the alumni coordinator said you were one of the most distinguished graduates in your class. Why didn't you mention these honors at graduation?" "I did mention them, Mom. You said that's nice," and immediately started talking about Amanda's real estate license. My father took a different approach, researching the actual financial structure of civil rights law firms and contingency cases. He discovered that my work on the Henderson case alone had generated over $2 million in legal fees for my firm. "Victoria, if your firm collected $2 million in fees from that case, what was your share?" "Enough to cover my expenses and take on more cases that matter to me." "But you could have negotiated a higher percentage, demanded partnership terms, built equity in the practice." "Dad, I'm not interested in building a law firm empire. I'm interested in achieving justice for people who need legal representation." Amanda conducted perhaps the most thorough investigation, hiring a private research firm to compile a comprehensive report on my professional reputation and case history. What she discovered shocked her. "Victoria, according to this report, you've been mentioned in over 40 legal publications. You've spoken at national conferences. You've been quoted as an expert in employment law by major newspapers. That's what happens when you specialize in complex civil rights cases and win consistently. But why don't you have a bigger practice? Why aren't you leveraging this reputation into something more substantial?" "Because substantial doesn't always mean better, Amanda. My practice allows me to take cases that large firms won't touch because the clients can't afford their fees." Derek discovered that I'd been offered positions at 3 major law firms in the past 2 years, including one partnership offer that would have tripled my current income. "Victoria, Morrison & Associates offered you a partnership? Why didn't you take it?" "Because Morrison's idea of legal success involves helping corporations avoid accountability for harmful practices. That's not why I became a lawyer." The revelation that shook them most came when Tyler, doing research for a school project on local legal professionals, found a video of me arguing before the state Supreme Court. The case involved challenging a law that allowed employers to classify full-time workers as contractors to avoid paying benefits. "Aunt Victoria, you argued in front of the Supreme Court?" "Twice, actually. We won both cases." My family watched the video in stunned silence, seeing me present complex legal arguments with confidence and expertise that contradicted everything they'd believed about my capabilities and achievements. "Victoria," my mother said quietly after the video ended, "we've been living in a completely different reality. We thought we knew who you were, but we didn't know anything." "You knew who you expected me to be, Mom. You just never bothered to find out who I actually was." Tyler looked up from his laptop. "Aunt Victoria, there are articles about you in legal journals going back 5 years. How could we not know about any of this?" "Because none of you were interested in my work unless it impressed the people you wanted to impress." For the first time, my family was confronting the scope of their willful ignorance about my life and career. 2 weeks after my family's research campaign began, an unexpected ally emerged from the most unlikely source, Amanda's own legal troubles. Bradley Morrison, the attorney my family had hired to handle her DUI case, made a discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about legal reputation and professional respect. Morrison called Amanda in a panic after Judge Harrison sentenced her to 30 days of community service, a hefty fine, and mandatory alcohol counseling, exactly the kind of serious consequences that Morrison had promised wouldn't happen. "Amanda, I need to ask you something about your sister Victoria. Judge Harrison mentioned her name during your sentencing, and I've been doing some research." "What kind of research?" "Professional research. Amanda, your sister isn't just some civil rights lawyer working with poor clients. She's one of the most respected attorneys in the state legal community." Amanda was sitting in my parents' living room when she took this call, with the entire family listening to Morrison's revelation on speakerphone. "What do you mean?" my father asked. I mean, Victoria Foster has argued landmark cases that are studied in law schools. She's been cited by appellate courts, quoted in legal textbooks, and invited to speak at national conferences. Half the judges in this state know her work. My mother's face went pale. Morrison, are you saying Victoria is famous in legal circles? Mrs. Foster, your daughter is what we call a, quote, lawyer's lawyer. She's the attorney that other attorneys refer their most complex cases to. When Judge Harrison mentioned her name in court, 3 other judges nodded in recognition. Derek leaned forward. If she's so well known, why doesn't she have a bigger practice, more money, a higher profile? Because she chooses cases based on principle rather than profit. Mr. Foster, your daughter has turned down more lucrative opportunities than most lawyers ever get offered. She could be making millions annually at any major firm. The phone call continued with Morrison explaining something that stunned my family. My reputation in the legal community was so strong that simply being Amanda's sister had influenced how some people viewed her case. Judge Harrison specifically mentioned that he was treating Amanda's case with extra scrutiny because he didn't want any suggestion that family connections influenced his decision. Your sister's reputation for integrity is so strong that it actually made Amanda's case more difficult, not easier. After Morrison hung up, my family sat in silence processing this information. Tyler finally broke the quiet. So Aunt Victoria's reputation is so good that judges are extra careful when they deal with our family? Apparently, my mother said quietly. Amanda shook her head slowly. Morrison said that when he mentioned my last name to other lawyers, 3 of them immediately asked if I was related to Victoria Foster. What did they say about her? My father asked. They said she's the kind of lawyer they aspire to be, brilliant, principled, and completely incorruptible. Derek pulled out his phone and showed the family a legal blog post he'd found. Look at this. Victoria was named one of the quote, top 40 under 40 feet civil rights attorneys in the country last year. My mother took the phone and read the article aloud. Attorney Victoria Foster represents the best of what the legal profession can achieve, combining exceptional legal skill with unwavering commitment to justice. Her work has not only changed lives but has established precedents that will protect workers' rights for generations. Tyler looked up from his laptop. There are dozens of articles about her. How did we miss all of this? Because we weren't looking, my father said quietly. Because we assumed we knew what success looked like, and we couldn't see any other definition. Amanda stared at her hands. Morrison said that most lawyers would kill for Victoria's reputation. He said respect from judges and peers is worth more than money in the legal profession. For the first time, my family was understanding that they'd spent years dismissing someone the legal community considered extraordinary. The moment of final reckoning came at the State Bar Association's annual awards dinner, an event my family had never shown interest in attending until they discovered I was receiving the Distinguished Service Award for my work in civil rights law. They'd insisted on buying a table, claiming they wanted to, quote, finally support my achievements properly. The ballroom at the Grand Hotel was filled with judges, attorneys, law professors, and legal scholars from across the state. As we took our seats, I noticed several colleagues greeting my family with curious expressions, clearly wondering how my parents and sister fit into my professional world. Victoria, my mother whispered as we sat down, everyone here seems to know who you are. This is my professional community, Mom. These are the people I work with, argue cases against, and collaborate with on legal issues. Judge Harrison approached our table during the cocktail reception, his wife at his side. Ms. Foster, congratulations on tonight's honor. It's well deserved. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like you to meet my family. Of course. Mrs. Foster, Mr. Foster, Amanda, it's a pleasure to finally meet Victoria's family. She's spoken of you often. My father extended his hand, clearly uncomfortable with the social dynamics. Judge Harrison, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Not at all. I have to say, you should be incredibly proud of Victoria's accomplishments. The Henderson case alone will be studied in law schools for decades. As Judge Harrison moved on to greet other attendees, my family remained quiet, observing the level of respect and recognition I received from legal professionals throughout the room. The dinner program began with remarks from the state bar president, followed by presentations of various awards. When my category was announced, the presenter's introduction shocked my family with its scope and detail. The Distinguished Service Award recognizes an attorney whose commitment to justice has made a lasting impact on our legal system and our community. This year's recipient has argued 12 cases before appellate courts, established precedents that protect workers' rights across 3 states, and recovered over $50 million in wages and damages for exploited workers. My mother grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. $50 million? The cases she's won have not only provided justice for individual clients, but have changed the legal landscape for thousands of workers who will benefit from the precedents she's established. She's been offered partnerships at major firms but has chosen to continue her civil rights work because, in her words, justice delayed for financial gain is justice denied. My father was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. The daughter he'd considered financially irresponsible had recovered more money for clients than his construction company had generated in its entire history. Her colleagues describe her as brilliant, principled, and absolutely fearless in pursuit of justice. Judges praise her preparation, her legal reasoning, and her unwavering integrity. She represents the highest ideals of our profession. Amanda was reading the program notes about my career, her face growing paler with each achievement listed. Victoria, it says here you've been quoted in Supreme Court decisions. Your legal arguments have been cited in cases you weren't even involved in. When you develop innovative legal strategies that work, other attorneys adapt them for their own cases. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing Attorney Victoria Foster. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Attorneys, judges, and legal scholars throughout the ballroom were applauding not just my specific achievements, but my approach to practicing law. As I walked to the podium, I could see my family sitting in stunned silence, finally understanding the scope of what they'd dismissed for 8 years. Thank you for this incredible honor, I began. When I chose to focus on civil rights law, people told me I was limiting my potential, that I should pursue more lucrative areas of practice. But I've learned that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account. It's measured by the positive impact you have on other people's lives. I looked directly at my family's table. The workers who received their stolen wages, the families who were protected from discrimination, the employees who gained workplace protections. They taught me that meaningful work is its own reward. Some attorneys measure success by their billable hours, their partnership profits, or their luxury purchases. I measure success by the precedents we establish, the injustices we correct, and the people we help. That's not idealism, that's purpose. The audience erupted in applause again, and I could see attorneys throughout the room nodding in agreement. This was my community, these were my peers, and they understood the value of the work I'd chosen to do. After the ceremony, my family was approached by a steady stream of legal professionals wanting to congratulate them on having such a distinguished attorney in the family. Mr. and Mrs. Foster, said Dean Morrison from the State Law School, you must be so proud of Victoria's contributions to legal scholarship. We use her briefs as teaching materials for our constitutional law courses. District Attorney Williams joined the conversation. Victoria's work has made my job easier in so many ways. The precedents she's established have strengthened worker protection laws across the entire state. Judge Martinez, who'd been following my career for years, pulled my father aside. Mr. Foster, I hope you understand how remarkable your daughter is. Victoria could be making millions at any corporate firm, but she's chosen to use her talents to help people who have nowhere else to turn. That's the mark of a truly exceptional attorney. By the end of the evening, my family had received more education about my career and reputation than they'd gathered in the previous 8 years. They'd met judges who praised my legal reasoning, attorneys who studied my case strategies, and law professors who assigned my work to their students. As we left the hotel, my mother was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. Victoria, we owe you more than an apology. We owe you respect, admiration, and recognition for achievements we were too blind to see. We spent 8 years criticizing choices that made you one of the most respected attorneys in the state, my father added. We measured your worth by our values instead of understanding yours. Amanda shook her head slowly. Victoria, half the legal profession knows your name. You're successful by any measure that actually matters. Tyler, who'd been quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Aunt Victoria, I want to be like you when I grow up. Not rich or famous, but someone who makes a difference. For the first time in my adult life, my family understood that I hadn't failed to meet their expectations. I'd succeeded beyond their imagination in ways they'd never bothered to recognize. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.